Senior English major here at Spelman College, and today I'll be presenting on my observations taken and produced into my critical essay entitled "It Takes a Village," who is informing the identities of Black female protagonists within speculative fiction written by Black female authors. So, my initial observations of these Black ingenues that we first started observing within the class entitled Butler's Daughters was that they had all been allocated to dystopian futures imagined by Black female authors within the genre. As the unwitting protagonists of their narratives, these characters are oftentimes designated as saviors of humanity from a variety of apocalyptic premises. The construction of the great Black hope that is meant to ensure the survival of the human species has been replicated by a number of celebrated authors that we ended up studying in class of the genre that also happen to share similar demographic identifiers. More specifically, a number of the Black female writers within speculative fiction have asserted images akin to their own within their works in the form of the novel's protagonists. Now, as of 1991, Octavia Estelle Butler held the title of the Black woman with the highest number of published works within North America. That number was 9, but again, the date was in 1991. This ultimately secured her position within the American literary canon, a feat worthy of recognition not merely due to, in and of itself, but given the genre in which her novels were written. Butler's contribution within speculative fiction is renowned not solely due to her own race and gender, but rather to the identities of her protagonists. And so that's really what we were seeing throughout multiple works within the class this semester. So I chose to focus specifically on the 5 works, beginning the one with the earliest publication of Justice and Her Brothers, published in 1978 by Virginia Hamilton, Parable of the Sword, published in 1993 by Octavia E. Butler, followed by Fledgling in 2005, again by Octavia E. Butler, Who Fears Death, published in 2010 by Nnedi Okorafor, and My Soul to Take, published in 2011 by Spelman's own Dr. Tananarive Due. So this was my first real introduction to Afrofuturism as a theme and the field of speculative fiction pertaining to the theme of Afrofuturism. So for me, what struck me most initially was, one, that we have these Black female heroines, these young Black female heroines leading their causes, but moreover, the ways in which they lead their charges, but more so, who is leading? Who are their mentors? Who are they learning from? Who are the people? Where are their mothers, effectively, and where are the other Black women within these pieces that are informing their noticeable Black female identities? So, what I happened to notice within these 5 specific pieces was a diverse representation of their mentorship, but noticeably absent would be Black female mothers. A la the Disney trope of the disappearing mother in the beginning of the movie. This didn't happen often within these pieces, but ultimately these characters were either displaced from their mothers or completely lacking a Black female mentor. Not all of them. Who Fears Death actually has a wonderful one, as does Dr. Due's novel. So I created a constant criteria for analysis in order to go through all of the pieces and dissect them. So first I identified the heroine of the novel, her name of course, her age, her race, and her species, because ultimately they're not all always going to be human. The identity of the heroine's parents was also paramount. Their race, whether it's identified, if the parents are still together, if they're both still living, and how exactly that relationship helped to form that character's identity. And finally, the identity of the heroine's mentors, which would ultimately be the person or the people who would help this heroine find their power and ultimately become the heroines of their stories. So first I dissected Justice and Her Brothers by Virginia Hamilton. The heroine, of course, is 11-year-old Justice Douglas. She's African American. She is human, but she is endowed with the ability of telepathy as well as the ability to time travel. She also is eventually becomes the leader of a group of young people who are predestined, according to the novel, to time travel to the future to prevent the apocalypse from happening. So within her unit, there's 4 children of them all together. Within the unit, she is the only girl and she is the youngest, although they are all depicted as young Black children. Also, what was incredible for this novel at the time in which it was published was that this is children's literature, this is children's fiction, and you have a black female protagonist, which was not happening in 1978. Her parents are both present, as in they are still married, but her parents aren't present for her adventures and thus don't ultimately result in her finding her power or summoning her power, because she isn't born understanding the power that she has. It arises when she meets her mentor, once it is awoken within her. And also it only is arisen once both of her parents have disengaged from her, and from that feeling of abandonment is she able to go forth and seek out another mentorship, or another mother, more specifically, who she finds in Mrs. Jefferson, a neighbor of the town, who also happens to be the mother of one of the members of the unit. She's known as a sensitive and ultimately helps Justice understand her power, role, and her destiny. But it only is until she loses her own mother, Mrs. Douglas, that she's able to do this. And Justice served as the introduction to Hamilton's Justice trilogy. Her ascension manifests through her telepathic abilities, her role as the leader of the unit, and her acceptance of their task of preventing the apocalypse. Ultimately, what was revealed to me through this specific text that I chose to focus on was the convection of race, gender, and how those identities were realized through her character and through her power. So one of the critics I studied found a correlation between Ralph Ellison's native son and the author Hamilton's use of dialogue and the act of her brother Tom's drumming within the novel, as well as Justice's struggle to belong, all to represent the identity as an African American, which ultimately helped to inform her identity within the novel as an African American. So she's not simply a white male protagonist painted chocolate. She is an actually realized and culturally relevant black female protagonist. Her lack of female friends runs concurrently with her desire to keep up with the boys of her neighborhood, as she is constantly outnumbered, but she is always the only girl in her environment. So as far as forming her own feminine identity, that only comes once she is forced to, once she realizes her feminine identity or comes to terms with accepting her feminine identity, does that give rise to the powers within her. So ultimately, what Hamilton ends up proving, or trying to assert, is that only when she's able to combine both her masculine and feminine qualities, in spite of the fact that she has very few female characters in the novel, is she able to be wholly realized as a heroine within her novel. She needs the balance of both. So. The second novel would be Parable of the Sower. Again, I can go quickly now. The heroine is 15-year-old Lauren. She's African-American, human endowed with, again, as you've previously heard, the hyper-empathy syndrome, which she inherits from her deceased mother. Her mother dies in giving birth to her, so automatically she is negated of her black female mother. But ultimately, that female character is the one that gives rise to her power that she has to one day overcome, and will ultimately prove to be a strength. She draws most of her strength and leadership qualities from her father, who she reveres, but she also, Butler ultimately likens her physically to her father, thereby negating any sort of feminine quality about her physical traits. She has a stepmother present, but she is depicted as Hispanic. Her mentors ultimately would be her father, her paternal grandmother who passed away, and herself, as the entire story is written through her journal entries as she's developing her own ways of thinking, the format of her disagreements with the people around her and the old ways of doing things that have led to the descent of society. So, the construction of her gender comes again. She has a bit of both. She has the traits from her mother that are ultimately, originally a source of shame for her that she comes to learn to assume in order to assume her power and her control as a leader. And then again, she learns a lot from her father, who is a revered community leader. And she again physically favors him, but it is once she disagrees with his religious convictions and ultimately his death that she is forced into her ascension as a religious leader of her own, and she's able to form her own religious community, and also become the savior of an entire community of people. within this dystopian future. Fledgling is an anomaly in that we have a very young black female character who is a vampire, but whose entire identity she forms on her own from her own experiences, from memories that she ends up forming as the novel begins with her memory being wiped clean. She has no idea of her identity. So in this novel, she is the only black female character. The other vampires that she belongs to, her family, none of them have any sort of racial or cultural recognition to her. So ultimately, what she serves as is a model of Butler trying to take away from the sociological and cultural normities of society in order to make us question what we consider normal and what we consider to be relative to society and accepted, what makes us human effectively. The more recent works of Who Fears Death by Cora Four feature well-rounded characters who, a well-rounded black female protagonist who has a black mother present within her life who informs her her identity as a strong character and ultimately helps her come to power. And then finally, and her mentors also would include her mother, also a boyfriend, and another who identifies with her racially, also one other sorcerer who originally does not want to help her because she is female. So again, within this novel, we are being presented with both her gender and her race specifically as this is set on the continent of Africa. And then finally, my soul to take, which is discusses the heroine Fana, who this is the final novel of this series. So it talks about the character of 18-year-old. Thank you.